Russia says it's pulling out of the International Space Station after
Russia's announcement that it is planning to pull out.
Intends to withdraw from the project after 2024.
There's a rumor going on about Russia leaving the ISS. Should this be a topic of concern?
They're leaving the International Space Station, I believe they said in 2024.
ISS is an acronym for the International Space Station. It is a sizable spacecraft in orbit orbiting the Earth. Crews of astronauts and cosmonauts reside there as a home. The space station serves as an exceptional science lab. The space station was created and used by international cooperation. Astronauts put together the space station's components while they were in space. It travels around 250 miles above Earth's surface in its typical orbit. It has a speed of 17,500 miles per hour. It, therefore, orbits the planet every 90 minutes. NASA uses the space station to learn more about surviving and operating in space. These discoveries will enable the sending of more people into space than ever before. In November 1998, the first component of the International Space Station was launched into space. The Russian Zarya control module was launched by a Russian rocket. Zarya was encountered in orbit by the space shuttle Endeavour about 2 weeks later. The American Unity node was on board the space shuttle. The crew gave Zarya the Unity node. Before the station was ready for residents, more sections were added throughout the course of the following 2 years. November 2, 2000 saw the arrival of the initial personnel. Since then, people have resided on the space station. Over time, more components have been added. NASA and its international collaborators built the space station until it was finished in 2011. The volume of the space station is equivalent to 2 Boeing 747 jetliners, or a home with 5 bedrooms. It can accommodate 6 crew members as well as guests. The weight of the space station on Earth would be close to 1 million pounds. When measured from the edges of its solar arrays, the station occupies an area the size of a football field, including the end zones. It contains US, Russia, Japan, and Europe testing equipment. People can now remain in space permanently thanks to the space station. Since the crew's first arrival, people have been residing in space daily. The laboratories on board the space station enable crew members to do research that is impossible elsewhere. People on Earth profit from this scientific research. Even ordinary living makes use of space science. The outcomes are goods referred to as spin-offs. Researchers also look into the effects long-term living in microgravity has on the human body. NASA and its collaborators have mastered the art of spaceship maintenance. Future space exploration will benefit greatly from all these lessons. A more than 20-year-old collaboration between the US and Russia will come to an end. Russia will depart from the International Space Station of NASA in 2024, according to the president of its space agency. Relations between the two space organizations have been a little chilly since the United States placed sanctions on Russia for invading Ukraine. We will fulfill all our obligations to our partners, but the decision to leave the station after 2024 has been made, the space agency chief Yuri Borisov said. Recently, after cosmonauts unfurled a flag that looked to endorse the invasion, NASA took the unusual step of chastising Russia for utilizing the International Space Station for political purposes. For its part, Russia has often threatened to stop participating in the space station, also known as the ISS. Although this is not a recent development, but this one seems more forceful and final compared to previous announcements. Major components for the space station have come from Russia. The propulsion that keeps the station in the right orbit is provided by its modules. However, the solar panels that power the station were made in the United States. Therefore, it is quite difficult to conceive a scenario in which the two partners cannot cooperate because the two components of the ISS are so intertwined and dependent on one another. A flurry of economic constraints and the ongoing dispute between Moscow and Washington over the Russian invasion of Ukraine appear to have sped up the withdrawal. Talks on Russian engagement after 2024, according to Dmitry Rogozin, the previous head of the Roscosmos, are only feasible if sanctions against the Russian space industry and other economic sectors are repealed last month. President Biden swiftly announced more sanctions on Russia in an effort to degrade its space program after Russian forces invaded Ukraine in February. We estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. That will strike a blow to their ability to continue to modernize their military. It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program. At the time, Biden predicted it would harm their space program and aerospace industry. Rogozin, well known for his quips and a long-running sarcastic Twitter spat with Elon Musk of SpaceX, suggested that Russia would allow the station to fall onto Earth in response to the penalties. There is a possibility of a 500-ton structure falling on India and China. Do you want to threaten them with such a prospect? The ISS does not fly over Russia. Therefore, all the risks are yours. Are you ready for them? Rogozin said then. Given the interdependence of the two parts of the station operated by NASA and Roscosmos, it is uncertain if the ISS can continue if one side abandons the initiative. Russia is in charge of the crucial propulsion control systems that keep the International Space Station in proper orbit as the Earth's gravity slowly drags it towards the atmosphere. The US section handles the power supply. The decision to leave the station after 2024 has been made, Borisov said, adding, I think that by that time we will start forming a Russian orbiting station. NASA and other international partners hope to keep the space station running until 2030, while the Russians have been reluctant to make commitments beyond 2024. The facility, roughly the length of a football field, is divided into two main areas, one controlled by Russia and the other by the United States and other nations. What will need to be changed on the Russian side of the complex to keep the space station running safely after Moscow leaves were not immediately obvious. The Russian announcement will undoubtedly fuel rumors that Moscow is negotiating with the West to lift sanctions related to the conflict in Ukraine. Despite the hostility surrounding Ukraine, NASA and Roscosmos reached an agreement earlier this month that will allow astronauts to continue using Russian rockets and allow Russian cosmonauts to begin using SpaceX to transport them to the space station this autumn. But there won't be any money exchanged throughout the flights. According to representatives from NASA and Russia, the agreement guarantees that there will always be at least one American and one Russian aboard the space station to maintain the seamless operation of the outpost on both sides. For example, when the Apollo and Soyuz spacecraft docked in orbit in 1975 as part of the first crewed international space mission, Moscow and Washington worked together in space even during the height of the Cold War, which benefited US-Soviet relations. NASA has been collaborating with American businesses to eventually replace the International Space Station to build their own private space stations. By the end of the decade, NASA wants these commercial space stations to be operational. We haven't received any official word from the partner as to the news today, Robin Gatens, director of the ISS for NASA, said during an ISS conference in Washington. When questioned by journalists about her desire for the US-Russia space relationship to stop, Gatens responded, "No, absolutely not." As the main collaborators on the two-decade-old space station, NASA and the Roscosmos have long aspired to continue regular integrated crewed flights as part of their joint partnership. According to NASA, the first integrated flights under the new arrangement will happen in September. They will witness U.S. astronaut Frank Rubio and two cosmonauts, Sergei Prokopyev and Dmitry Peltelin, launched to the space station from Kazakhstan's Baikonur Cosmodrome, which Moscow owns. In exchange, cosmonaut Anna Kikina will launch from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The U.S., together with the two astronauts and a Japanese astronaut on a SpaceX crewed Dragon voyage to the orbiting laboratory. NASA is currently developing a plan to explore alien worlds. One of the initial steps is the space station. NASA will draw on lessons learned aboard the space station to prepare for human missions that travel deeper into space than ever before. It's not like the Russians are declaring their departure for tomorrow. It's not quite as dramatic as it seems. They're announcing their departure, but it won't be until 2024. They will collaborate with partners as they move through this process. Therefore, it's not a sudden, abrupt exit. So they have around 2 years to decide what to do. What do you think about this new development? Share your thoughts with us, and don't forget to drop a comment below.